Everyone, thank you for joining me again today. This is day 7 of JavaScript Basics, and I just want to thank you all for continuing to ride this along on this journey with me, and I hope you can continue to grow and become better at JavaScript with me. So today we are going to go over global scope and functions. This will be our first lesson that we're going to learn about. I'm going to start that Pomodoro timer, and it's actually correct this time. It is going to be on 15 minutes. I stopped being lazy, just set it to 15 minutes, and we can get ready to go. Here we go. All right, let me start this timer. 15 minutes. There we go. So we have global scope and function. So in JavaScript, scope refers to the visibility of variables. Variables are defined outside of a function block, have global scope. This means that they can be seen everywhere in your JavaScript code. So basically, if you create a function and this function is available anywhere that someone will want to call it. So when we dive in a little bit more later, we'll find out how dangerous this can be, like having a function that is available wherever, and you can call it wherever, or a variable that's available everywhere. But that's not the scope of this. We want this function to be a global function. So let's continue to see what it's talking about. So variables which are used without the var keyword are automatically created in the global scope. So if you have a variable inside of this function, it'll be technically considered part of the global scope. Now it says this can create unintended consequences everywhere else in your code, or when running a function again. You should always declare your variables with the var keyword. So using the var, declare a global function or a global variable, my global, outside of any function. Initialize it with the value of 10. So it says declare my variable here. So we want to declare that variable called my, I think I disconnected my keyboard. Yep, I did. Here we go. So we're going to call it my global, and we need to use the var keyword, right? Else that could get bad for us. And then we'll make that equal 10. And then it says inside function fun1 assign 5 to oops global without using a var keyword. So inside of here, fun1 says assign 5, so we need to make if we want to make this a global variable, we need to use oops global equals 5 without using the var keyword. And so we're assuming that, so right here we're declaring our variable here. This will be a global variable because it's outside of the scope of these two functions. Here this will be a global variable as well, because when you declare a variable inside a function without the var keyword, so if it's not using var here, so var, with using var, this variable will be only used here, but because we didn't assign it a variable, it's in the global scope, which is here. You can have unintended consequences, and we're going to learn about those. So let me hit Command Enter, and there we go. We did it successfully. we completed that lesson. Now let's move on to local scope and functions. And just to let everybody know, the reason why I'm spending a little bit more time on this is because this scope within functions and learning about global scope, local scope, will be very important being a JavaScript developer, and it's something that you're going to probably, if you're new, run into a few problems with it and trying to understand it and trying to get your mind to grasp it. So it's good for us to let's just talk about it now and get through some things, that some troubles that we may face in the future, get those out, so then that way we may still do those same mistakes like I always do, but then I realize, like, okay, I remember doing this and I know the way to fix this. So here we go. It says local scope and functions, variables which are declared within a function, as well as the function parameters, have local scope. That means they are only visible within that function. Here is a function, myTest, with a local variable called lock. So function myTest, we have a variable named locked, which equals foo. So when we console log that, when we invoke this function, logs will, or the this will input foo. But if we console log it outside of it, we see that lock is not defined. So let's explain that. Let's explain what's going on. So we have a function, myTest. myTest has a variable in there called lock, which equals this foo string. And then we console log lock. So when we call myTest right here, it returns foo, because that's what's in myTest. We're console logging lock, which equals foo. But when we try and console log lock outside of this function, right? So this is within the function. This console log is outside of that function. Lock is not defined, because the only way you can call this variable is if you are within this function, or you can use this variable if you're within this function. Can't use that variable outside of this function. And when doing JavaScript, these are some key things that can become a little bit confusing, and you can run into some errors. So it's good that we're going to go over this even in more detail. So let's do this. It says declare a local variable, myvar. So I want a local variable. So a local variable will be a variable within this function. So I'm going to use var myvar, and I'll just make it equal Sam. And it says run the test. So it says declare a local variable myvar inside of my local scope, run the test, and then follow the instructions commented out in the editor. Okay, so so we run it, command enter. It says var is not defined. My var is not defined. So let's figure out why. So it's run and check the console. My var is not defined outside of my local scope, right? So they're console logging right here. So it's now remove the console log line to pass the test. So we need to remove this line in order to pass the test. And now we get now when we console log it, we get this variable. So let's talk about, we may go over the time limit, but this is something that we need to discuss a little bit. Okay, so we have my local scope, which is a function. This function creates its own scope. So you have the global scope, which is anything outside of this function, which is global. So anything outside of this function is global. So we can put var sam equals sam. You know, this is global. Almost any function or yeah, I mean, almost any function that needed this variable would be able to use it. But now we created a function called myLocalScope, which has its own scope. So we call this the local scope. In this function, we have a variable called myVar. We have it equal to sam. We're going to console log myVar. And when we invoke that function, myLocalScope, it should read whatever myVar is, which will be sam. And we see that right here. The thing is that when we check the console right here, so now we run console log, which this console log is in the global scope now. It's outside of this function. So if we console log myVar, it doesn't know what myVar is. There is nothing in the global scope. Name is myVar. There's nothing in there. So when it looks for this, it's going to be undefined because nowhere in the global scope have we defined myVar. So that's why the test didn't pass, because it will be showing up undefined in there. But when we remove it, it'll show what we want it to show, which is sam, when we invoke this function. Hope everyone is able to understand that. Leave a comment if you need more explanation on that, and we can talk about that. It's like some of these things that can be pretty, it can get a little bit confusing because different languages do things differently. And just being new to programming like I was, it totally confused me. So it sometimes just takes a little bit of practice, just to do some things and to make those mistakes. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's what I always say, because you can learn from them, you can grow from them. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. But as I was saying, like learning this type of stuff is what will make you a good developer and understanding JavaScript, because like I said, different languages have a different way of how they interpret local scope, but right now learning it, how we're learning it now through how JavaScript is teaching it, will just at least give you the fundamentals of, like, that all programming language will do this sort of thing, but you will at least have an understanding of it, and you can apply it to any language. So let's keep going. Let me hit Command Enter. I was probably rambling too much, guys. Sorry about that. And we are going to go to global versus local scope and functions. And I am going to go over time. I see I only have 1 minute left, but I'm going to at least finish this off, and then we will be done. So let's hurry up with this. It says it is possible to have both local and global variables with the same name. When you do this, the local variable takes precedence over the global variable. So here's an example. It says we have a variable named some var, and we've assigned it a string which has the name hat in it. And we have a function called myFun, and in the function we have a variable, same variable, and that, so it says some var, but we have it equal to a string with a different name, which is, instead of hat, has head, and we want it to return some var, which is the variable. We want it to return what this variable says. So according to what we just read up here, we know that the local scope right here will take precedence over the global scope. So it says the function myFun will return head because the local version of the variable is present. So right now I want us to add a local variable to my outfit function to override the value of outerwear with sweater. So let's do that. So it says add a local variable to my outfit function. So we want to add a local variable to my outfit function to override the value of outerwear with sweater. So we want var outerwear to equal sweater, lowercase, and if I hit Command Enter, we should be good. So at first, before we had this, so if I delete it, before we had this, the output of outerwear when we returned it would be t-shirt. Now that we do this, we have a local variable that has the same variable name in the global and in the local scope. We named it sweater, which is different from the global scope. So it will return sweater. And the reason is because the local scope takes precedence over the global scope. When I hit Command Enter, there we go. So that is, I'll probably end it here. No, I will end it here. I want to thank you all for joining me again. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. I will try and get back to you as soon as possible. If you can, leave a like if you did like the content. Also, I just want to say, everybody, love your family, love your friends, love yourself, and peace.